All right, now we're over in Illustrator. I'm going to walk through some of the beautiful possibilities with the trace tool. The the thing about the trace tool is that it just takes some manipulation to get it right. So as you learn the tool, you get better at adjusting your photos to do what you want the trace tool to do. So it just takes some time. Now this is the entire one of the JPEGs that I had made previously. I also just took a piece from Photoshop and just like, what happens if I only take that piece? Sometimes your photos will be low enough resolution where it's a drastic bad thing. In this case, I think it's okay because I can still see quite a bit. It just happens to be the texture that I think it can handle. So let's run these both through the trace tool to see what happens. So the first thing I like to do is I keep a copy of the ones that I'm doing. Just, I like to have a reference point, like how much is it changing. And then typically when you choose an image, now I always work, for those of you guys who have had me before, I always work in Essentials Classic just to be consistent across the board. So if yours doesn't look like this, that's why. I like it just because I like to be able to come up here and quickly choose a setting. In this case, we'll try quite a few different kinds, just as, for example purposes. Let's make some copies here. That should get us going. Okay. So first things, if I click on the image trace tool, there are some pretty strong defaults that you can try, and as you get used to it, you can do better and better. High fidelity photos can work when you're using with a lot of colors, or if you have a photo that you're like, dang, that thing is too small and it needs to go way bigger, then that's a really great way to be able to basically get a photo that is now also a vector. So I guess since I'm here, I'll just show you what that means. Depending on the size and quality of your image, number of colors, etc., this can actually take a very long time because it's parsing through every single thing and making every tiny thing into a vector. So you can imagine the amount of time that it takes. Every time you hit trace, it's going to take a while. Now, when you look at it closer, you can see that it's turned into tiny little shapes. Sometimes those shapes are pretty cool. Sometimes they're too much. So if that's the case, you can open up this little trace panel, or you can go up to window and hit image trace. Oh, it's just off screen for you. And then choose some variations. In this case, me adding more color won't make sense because it's monochromatic. But you can add more color. You can also do the advanced mode and do a bunch of other things. Oh gosh, it's thinking again. I don't even think I changed anything. Lordy, stop. Oh, everything takes a while. Even stopping takes so long. It's just a lot. I mean, it is, I am, dealing with a lot of stuff. I get it. Come on. So you can change how many paths, you can increase, you can decrease, you can change how much little tiny texture it's picking up. And in this case, we probably want it to pick up quite a bit. And then the other option down here, it's not going to let us do it for this one because it's a photo version, but there's an ignore color, which I'll show shortly. So if that's one you're looking for, it might work for you if you've got a ton of color. And again, this is just a really great option if you're going from photo to much bigger photo that you just don't have resolution for. And then all of a sudden it's a vector and you got as much detail as you need. I'm going to go over to, photo stuff. We're not really doing photo stuff. What happens if it's 3 colors? Like again, this one's doesn't make sense to do that because it's monochromatic. So let's just move down to the black and white logo stuff. You can do shades of gray. But that essentially is what we already have. What I want to show you is that how drastic you can go from a photo version to something like this. It's hard to get this out of a photo if you're in Photoshop only, but this is a really quick avenue to get at it. And you can see that it's basically just black and white now, as it says. You can change the threshold here up here. So if you do less, you're going to get a lot more white. If you do more, you're going to get darker. So in this case, if I was like, let me see if I can get more black out of it, like, yep, I can. There's a point where it just turns black. What's interesting though is this becomes a completely different texture than it was short time ago. And so Again, we just save any variation that is intriguing to you, whether it's for this particular project you're working on at that moment or possibly something for the future. Just keep it. It's harder to go back later and be like, let me try to figure out what I was doing at that point to get that look. You're just not going to remember all the particulars, I promise. So, especially because it's usually like months later. So save whatever variations you want, remembering that yes, it's black and white, but that doesn't mean it has to stay black and white, right? You can always go back to Photoshop and recolor something really easily, or in some cases, if it is one color only, I will say that changing colors on this scale where there's this many pieces is pretty much impossible. So that's where I would go back to Photoshop and utilize its color power. Okay, so that's a variation. If you mess around with your noise layers, you'll see it'll pick up less and less and less. I typically have mine pretty much at 1 because it'll pick up most things that I need it for, but you can see that it feels different, right, than even if it was just slightly more. So between noise and the amount of black, it can be, this thing can become like 50 different possibilities, which is really fantastic. So again, sometimes you want to just focus on one section. Maybe you end up just using a little bit of it. Sometimes you might want to use all of it. It just, depends on your situation. I do want to show you while I'm here the ability that this one has. Now that it's only one color or a couple colors, you can click this little icon here. And it'll typically choose white as its color to ignore. It's just used to that. So you can see as I come out, the background's gray and now that's gray. This makes laying down textures a lot easier if you don't want to have to deal with all the blending modes. And so again, that might be something that you want to keep handy. Now whatever I lay it on, let's see, this one, you can see that it's just laying right on top of it. You can see right through it. So that is a pretty nice version to keep. Now the tricky part comes with, if you want to go back between Photoshop and Illustrator, if I save this as a JPEG, it flattens it out, right? If I could try to save it as a PNG, so if I'll just make a quick artboard here for reference. It turned white because now the background's white. And I don't even, how many artboards do I have? I'm going to get rid of that one. No, I just have one artboard to contend with. So if I do a save as for this one, then for this one, of course, I'm going to save it as an AI. Always do that. You need those as you're working. But if I want it just as a standalone to use for, I don't know what purpose yet, you might want to save it as a couple different variations. So in this case, I'm just going to export it because I want to just take only the artboard. No, I don't want that one. Export as. Now I have a little control. Now, if I was using multiple artboards, I could specify which ones. I eliminated that issue because there's only one artboard. And then in this case, I might want to say, traced, just to be very particular. I immediately know which one I'm talking about, at least a little better. And you'll still probably have variations. In this case, I'm leaving it as black and white. So, and there might be variations of that one, right? It's just a lot of numbering. So I'll go ahead and export that, but it needs to know what kind of, what file size, what kind of resolution. I would always go as high as possible on these ones because I just don't know. So if I really am not sure and it might need to be quite large, then I'll save it as 600. Now, in this case, because it's an AI file, I can copy and paste back and forth to Photoshop, so I'm not too worried. But if you were setting this off and you didn't know what they were going to use it for, then I would say to go high. Go high on everything, on the quality, on the resolution, etc. I'm not going to end up doing this because it's pretty high. I don't need to use up all my space right now, but I would recommend that if you're unsure. Basically, let's say like you're doing a brand guide and you want to provide a bunch of different backgrounds for somebody to utilize. Make sure that you provide some really high resolution ones. Okay, so that's one variation, but that in that version, it is, it's only doing, Okay, so it defaulted to JPEG. I want to do a PNG because in a JPEG format, it saves all that white information. I want it to actually be clear. I want it to be able to open it and overlay it on something and keep that clear background. So that means I need it as a PNG. Same situations, make it as high as you can. We do not want the background white in this instance. We want it transparent. And these are, again, all variations that you could provide a client, or keep for yourself, depending on what you're doing. It's a chunky file, so it's having to think through it. There we go. So now we've got a couple variations just of that one. So as you can see, you can keep going and going and going. And then if I brought in one with color, that would change the whole thing entirely. So let me just go ahead and open one that did have a lot of color in it, just so you can see how it perceives things. It's a lot different, and especially depending on the kind of contrast it has. It's different. So let's do a color version, and we can say how many color variations. If you really want to limit it down, and just to give it a test, see what happens. Let's hit the trace. Sorry, I know you can't see that, but there's a trace button down at the bottom of that. You just got to be patient because it's thinking hard. Okay, so again, I like to put them side by side just so I can really see what's happening. I'm going to move the artboard. I'm feeling distracted by it. Oh, could I just moved it off? That's okay. So it did it, actually, I'm surprised. It did it not too bad for only having 6 colors. That's how it interpreted it. So if it's like, okay, well, that's all right, I want to see what else happens. Unfortunately, when you make a copy, it is thinking through the entire thing again. So just wait. So that would be when we're like, well, it's okay, it's not quite there yet. So what happens if I do 4 colors, let's just say? And I haven't even employed yet trying to figure out how much noise it wants or any of those good things. So gotta wait, see again. So you can see it really doesn't know what to do with that middle value situation. So at this point, you'd be like, okay, maybe I don't want the top and the bottom, but I'm really like happening what's just the top or just the bottom. And then again, you can isolate those areas and use them at will. So at this point, I'm like, yeah, that's probably just a little bit too little. I'll go back to 6. You can even add more if you want. If you really wanted to say like, okay, I like all of it, but I don't want to see the gold, you could do a ignore color, and rather than choosing the automatic white that it does, which it has no way to even get rid of at this point, then you can choose the eyedropper and say, let me see, I'll choose the light gold just to be quirky and see what happens. Okay, so that's how it interprets it. So now whatever I overlay it onto, it's going to pick up that background color. And I could do it, it's just like so many good things can happen so quickly. So, yeah, just have fun with your particular set of images. What I'm asking for is basically, I want to see your unedited versions when you submit them, just so you can see the drama. We can show other people what happened. But if you're going to use a couple photos like I did where I've overlaid, that's fine. You can submit both. If you're like, I didn't like that one, but I'm going to, maybe you end up using 3 different photos. That's fine. Just make sure you submit the originals along with your other stuff. What I'm looking for the final stuff, let me go over to Blue Line. It's not too specific here. I do want the original photos as they came, either JPEGs or HDICs, that's fine. And then from Photoshop, I want at least 3 different variations that you came up with, but that could be from color changes, contrast references, etc. Just it could be a buildup of a bunch of stuff. But 3 that you like, and they do need to be distinct from one another. Like you could use gradients with them if you wanted to, although I would say sometimes the gradients maybe you would need as more like a final step. But if you want to play around with it, absolutely, that's fine. And then 3 different variations of traces that you got from Illustrator. Now, as you can imagine, you can go back and forth, almost ad nauseum, just constantly testing out possibilities. Let's see if I go back to that black one. Like, that's super intense, right? I'm not going to ask you to submit those variations, but you're welcome to. So let's say, okay, I want to try, it was like, just say like, well, it was like just a little too quiet. So now I want to, make it just a bit darker. You can see like just laying that on top, you get a difference. And then of course we can do all the different kinds of, this one probably won't really do much. There's not enough happening. Let me throw it on this one just for some drama. Even the fact, like if you have one thing, you bring it into Photoshop and then you mess around with it, and then you have another variation, flipping it around just vertically, horizontally, whatever. I mean, again, it just becomes a new thing, different than what you anticipated. And then one little small thing, as you move from Illustrator to Photoshop, like when I did this drop down, it's asking me what I want to drop it in as. That's up to you. I tend to manipulate my pixels quite a lot, and so I just drop it in as a pixel right away. Otherwise, I'd have to do rasterize from if I do it as a smart object. But the next thing is that it's still thinking as a vector. So that means even though it came in that size to fit my screen or my file size, I don't have to stay there. Right now, I am not losing out on any kind of resolution at all because it's a vector getting dropped in. So I could be like, I only like this little tiny piece. Great, that's fine. So bring it in, drop it, and once I hit return and it accepts the change, then it is back to pixels. I mean, it's a big chunky thing, but it's still back to pixels. So there might be times where you want just a little portion of it. So being able to go back and forth is a really fun thing between the programs. And that is just, I mean, I like that enough that if, I wouldn't mind that as a print, like somewhere in my house. I personally would probably repaint it, but you get the idea. So I think the name of this particular exercise should just be Texture Fun, figuring out some new methods that maybe you haven't tried before, and getting some interesting backgrounds, but also maybe some pieces of art in the end that you just really like too. So you're welcome to turn in any extras, but I at least want 3 that are from Photoshop and 3 from the Illustrator process. I would always recommend going from Photoshop to Illustrator, but if you took the perfect photo with great amounts of contrast, you can try to go to Illustrator directly, but most of the time it needs a little tweaking in Photoshop first. So that is the beginning of our journey into texture backgrounds, or just textures for whatever we feel like. But this is a good start.